Welcome to Memoir Church. Those of you who are just arriving, I am here with Richard Hohler, and I am very excited to have him read some of his beautiful work and to talk to him a little bit. So we're just going to have a little chit chat. How are you doing, Rich?
I'm doing good. I'm good.
Good. Good, good, good. So you do so many things, but what you're actor, director, writer, your teacher. So what's your favorite thing that you do out of all of those?
It's of course it's like asking what's my favorite, who's my favorite child?
Mhm.
Well, I think the very, very first thing I did was acting, so it always comes back to that, and everything that I do is kind of informed. When I'm directing, I'm focused on the actor. When I'm writing, something in the theater, it's like the actor is foremost in my mind. I teach acting now at the prison and also at a couple of New York City colleges, CUNY colleges. So that I would say that that's my focus, but I love directing, I love writing, I love teaching. I
Mhm.
really do. I'm sometimes I feel like I'm so spread out that I don't get as far as I'd like to get in any specific area, because like when I just get frustrated with one thing, I just move on to something else. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
consequently, I've become quite adept in those areas and comfortable in those areas, and it's kept me, it's kept the rent paid for quite some time.
That's also nice, a perk when you get
Yeah.
to do something you love and get paid
Wow.
for it.
Yeah.
How did you find yourself working in the prison system? How did that
A
come about?
bunch of years. That was about 14 years ago, I guess 13, 14 years ago. I was doing a stage reading of a play, Fathers and Sons, that I wrote and performed. It was a two-hander, and I did a reading at the Fortune Society. My good friend David Rothenberg has been a great support for me throughout my career when he was a press rep, and he also founded the Fortune Society, which is an organization that helps formerly incarcerated men and women. But I was doing a reading there, and a guy came up to me afterward and said, "Hey, I saw in your bio that you teach." He says, I have a little workshop up in Otisville Correctional Facility. I was wondering if you might come up and do a master class, just a one-time thing." And I said, "Oh, sure, sure, that'd be great. And I went up and I did it, and it was pretty much a mountaintop experience. And then a couple months later, they called me and said, "Would I come back?" And I said, "Yes, but just one more time. That's it. I don't have any work. I can't, it was like I really protested too much. And after the second visit, I was being fingerprinted and I was signing papers, and I was going there regularly every Friday night. So, and I did
Wow.
that for 10 years straight until the pandemic stopped the workshop. And now just this past, just about a month and a half ago, we started it up for the first time in 3 years. And
Mm.
it's just been remarkable. That's all I can
Wow.
say. It's like I'm so glad I decided to go back. I thought maybe that was a chapter in my life, but I think it was just the first chapter. And so we're
Mhm.
on to the second now.
Mhm. How often are you there? How often do you teach?
I, I I'm there once a week, every Friday night from 6 to 9. But then we have a show going up in June, so I'll start going twice a week, and then the 2 weeks before the show, I'll be there every night.
How long have you been
Theater. You know how
doing?
theater is.
Yeah, yeah. How long have you been doing
Yeah.
that?
Well, I did the workshop for 10 years, but during the pandemic, while toward in the 2020, January of 2020, I started an outside class for former members of the workshop on the inside. So we
Mm.
have an acting company now for formerly incarcerated actors. And so all during the pandemic, I was doing that online. We did 4 productions on Zoom, and I was teaching at the prison online. And
Mm.
then, it wasn't until just recently that I began to go back in person.
Wow. And it's been
So
such
it's
a
been
rich
13.
part of your life, yeah, that you've
Yeah.
written, you have a memoir that's told through the lens of that. Can
Yeah,
you
the
tell
the
us a little bit
company,
about how that came to be?
yeah. Well, I mean, people have been telling me, I've been telling them stories about the prison and what led up to it and everything else for a long, long time. And people says, "You got to write a book about that." And I thought, well, that's easy. Yeah, okay, I'll go write a book. I'll be right back. And but I just kept, after a while, I started to just take, I just to take notes, and with some of the stories, and then I showed my agent, a little bit of the material, and it was originally going to be a hybrid book where I had lesson plans and scenes and stuff like that, but she was really, really affected by the memoir section of it, which was just my experience in the prison. And so then I focused on that, and I'm actually doing the finishing touches on it. And this is my third draft that she feels is the one she's going to send out. So,
Yay. Well, Rich, it's so great. I've had the honor. I first met you at Someone Speaking, which Roland Tech does through Hear Me Out monologues. I got to direct you in a piece called Red, and I watched the YouTube video, and that was very fun. And then I got to have you in a writing class also, and hear your beautiful words. And so now I just thought it would be great if you could share those beautiful words with more people. And I would love for you to give a read, and I will bow out and give you the
okay.
stage, as it were.
All right, and I brought two things today. One is from the book Acting Out, which is the memoir about my prison work, and then I've also brought the preface to a new memoir that I'm working on called "You Don't Know Me," and that's a very, very short piece that I would do last. But anyway, this first piece is this is actually a chapter that where it goes back a little bit when I to what I did leading up to the prison, because I've always worked with troubled kids, and I've always and this was where I worked with it at an alternative to detention, which is kind of like a prison but not really. And and then also when I worked at the Fortune Society, and David Rothenberg had a lot to do with all this. So this is from Acting Out. And ATD, by the way, is alternative to detention. My ATD class consists of 15-year-old boys who are awaiting trials that will result in their being released, remanded, or imprisoned. Fear and anger pervade the center, many of the parole officers and attendants having themselves passed through the very system they are now monitoring, and it seems not much the wiser for it. Shouting, threatening, browbeating, a lot of literal and figurative get out of my sight stuff. Just what these kids do not need. They are already well out of the sights of their families, friends, schools, and communities. Derek shows up in class hyper and ready to shake things up. Over the next few weeks, I watch him transform from being wisecracking and non-cooperative to wisecracking and totally down with the work. After a particularly complex exercise in which he excelled, he proclaims to the class, "I'm an actor." And indeed he is. As we rehearse for a public presentation of scenes, Derek sets the standard for the class. Punctual, reliable, committed. He learns his line cold before anyone else and always volunteers to stand in for someone who is absent. His parole officer is impressed. I think Derek's found his niche. He rehearses and performs 3 full scenes. The Mammoth and Shepherd are terrific, but the Beckett, which he chose himself, is a mountaintop experience.
Mm.
The many luminous productions of Waiting for Godot I have seen fade into obscurity as I witness Derek's performance in the final moment of Beckett's absurd and existential masterpiece.
Mm.
Estragon, Derek, proposes to his companion Vladimir, classmate Devon, that they end the paucity of their existence by hanging themselves from a tree. Devon points out that they lack even the means to do that, no rope, and must keep on. Sighing, Derek looks up at the tree, drawn on butcher paper by the art class, runs his hand over his long cornrows, reaches deep inside, and with the subtlest and saddest smile I have ever seen on a human face, says, "True." He really gets it. But then
Mm.
again, who better to understand Beckett's conundrum of waiting for something that might never come than the teenage boy expelled from school, branded with a record, and lost in the system? What greater exemplar than a young old soul who yearns to end the kind of life he is living, but lacks the guidance and wherewithal to do it? A few weeks later, despite his good behavior and outstanding work in the showcase, a judge remands Derek to the ATD for an indeterminate time. It crushes him. He never comes back to class.
Mm.
On a brutal July afternoon, a few months after the semester finished, I receive a call from one of the administrative assistants at the ATD. She informs me that Derek was murdered in his apartment by a member of a rival gang. I stand holding the phone like a prop in a play, struggling for breath and asking mundane questions about when and where a service will be held. On the day of Derek's wake, I head out to East New York, Brooklyn with a totally inadequate card, $100 in cash, and a copy of Waiting for Godot to give to his mother. When I arrive at the funeral home, I am shocked to find no one there except four young girls whispering in the back of the visitation room. I walk up front and sit a few feet from the coffin and weep for the loss of such a brilliant artist, for the gang colors in which he is dressed, for the lack of attention to the end of his young life, for just about every fucking injustice and tragedy I can think of. The funeral home director tells me that Derek's mother was too shaken to come that afternoon and stayed home, perhaps explaining what kept everyone else away. I
Mm.
obtain her address, and my friend Joe, who occasionally assists in class, and I make our way to the projects where had lived. As we walked into the building, we draw stares from all around, doubtless due to our race. Joe remarks impassively, "They think we're cops."
Mm.
There are hastily reproduced pictures of Derek taped up in the lobby with dozens of colored glass candles bunched together on the floor beneath the photos. We ride to the top floor in the poorly maintained and heavily graffitied elevator. More pictures and candles line the hallway leading to the apartment. I ring the bell and wait. A dog barks angrily inside, and there's a lot of shouting about removing him to another room. When a young girl finally opens the door and I explain who I am, she leads us inside. There are several vases of arranged flowers around the room, and the dining room is laden with bowls and plates and pans of food. The walls of the apartment are lined with white plastic folding chairs. For all intents and purposes, this is where the wake is being held. The girl nods toward a youngish, heavy-set woman across the room. Derek's mother rises from one of the folding chairs and walks toward me. Standing several feet from the doorway in which Derek was shot and killed, she avoids my eyes as I hand her the card. I point to the cover of the play and struggle to tell her how brilliant her son was in the scene from Godot. I echo his parole officer in saying how he found his niche, though dared not say what we both knew, that it was not in time. I extol his artistry and talent, but she is unable to take it in, locked behind a wall of grief and staring over my shoulder into an unforgiving future. It is not until I tell her how Derek seemed to see things that others did not, could not see, that she looks in my eyes for the first time. Her face brightens as she recognizes me, not as someone she knew, but as someone who knew what her boy knew. Our embrace is sudden, mutual. We hold each other and cry. She whispers in my ear, "Yes, yes, he could. He could always see so much more." I suspect we all can, if we dare, if we allow ourselves to see, if we remove the blinders and the defenses, the need to react, to be right, to save face, to win, if we stop punishing and start helping, if we realize that there are solutions to a lot of the suffering and misunderstanding that drive people to do things they really do not want to do, that those solutions can be found in art and music and dance and theater, that expressing ourselves in those ways is something we need to do to be fully human. Space. I was 17 and only had my driver's license for a little over a month when I had a fender bender. I knew my father would go off on me, and he did. I was so humiliated and ashamed that I tore up my license. Then my father did something that seemed even more cruel than reaming me out for crashing his car. He picked up the pieces of my license, handed them to me, and told me to go to the store and get milk. When I said I could not, would not, he physically pushed me out the door. He told me if I did not drive right away, I might never drive again. Albeit from the mouths of brutes, it turned out to be wise advice. David Rothenberg reaffirmed that counsel after my work at the ATD. He saw how shaken I was after Derek's murder and noticed I was slowly backing away from the work I loved. In the decades with the Fortune Society, David had seen it all. There had been much anguish along the way, and I'm sure there must have been times when he wanted to get out of the line of fire. But he never did, and it seemed he was not going to let me either. I receive a call from the program director at Fortune who needs a teacher for a group of young parolees. David told her about my acting out class, and she felt it was the ticket. The men range in age from late teens to mid-20s. They are studying for their GEDs and trying to get their feet back on the ground after having their lives interrupted by jail sentences. I tell the director I'll think about it. I call David with a million reasons why I'm not ready. He is implacable. "Richard, just do it." I know he is right, and I trust him. So I tape my proverbial license together once again and get back behind the wheel. I'm still apprehensive when I arrive from my first class at Fortune's new flagship building in the industrial wilds of Queens, but I am pleased with the large blue room to which I'm assigned, the manageable class size, and the enthusiasm of the group. X marks the spot once again, and a 3 months residency begins. 16 guys consistently show up to class, respond well to the exercises, and are enthusiastic about performing for an invited audience at the end of the term. A few weeks into class, Matthias and Derek, an oddly comforting coincidence, show up early in the middle of a heated argument. They accost me, trying to beat each other to the punch, one calling my name louder than the other and repeatedly pushing to the front of a non-existent line. When Matthias finally concedes, Derek comes out with it. Rich, we want to ask you something, and you have to answer the truth, okay? I assume it has something to do with class or the upcoming show, who is being cast in what role, or will there be agents and theater professionals attending? Judging from their fervor, I suspect it might even be a case of who was doing a better job. I am completely unprepared for Derek's question. Would you rather be stabbed or shot? By the look on both their faces, I can see this is not a time for speeches about conflict resolution or rhetoric on violence and its rippling effect on society, nor is it a time to wax eloquent on art and life and the universe. It is time for a reply. I think about it for a few seconds. Shot. Derek jumps up and down, screaming with glee. See, I told you, I told you. To this day, I have no idea why Derek was so thrilled that he was right or why it mattered in the first place. Nevertheless, once that was settled, we could get on with our work. I have learned that most young people do not want their questions analyzed or judged. They just want them answered. Derek and Matthias are working on the same Waiting for Godot scene that I had originally cut from the lineup out of some vague notion of respect and then reinstated for the same reason. These two lads could not be more perfectly matched to the scene. Their constant wacky philosophical arguments about their day-to-days, which clearly entail preferred methods of being snuffed, as well as their fierce loyalty to each other at this difficult time in their lives, allows them to effortlessly deliver the goods. Although they were in their early 20s, you could easily imagine Matthias and Derek sitting out in front of a bodega playing dominoes with the rest of the viejos in the neighborhood. And that is just how I directed the scene. Matthias's counselor tells me that acting out is the first class he has ever participated in. In fact, it's the first time he has ever spoken in class. His MO was a lot of head nodding and grunting, and here he is not only speaking, but standing up on stage and giving voice to Beckett's Vladimir with a cogency that is impressive. Derek is the opposite, mercurial, cagey, never missing a dramatic beat. The combination of their disparate rhythms is hypnotic. You do not doubt them for a second. In addition to Beckett, I choose a variety of published scenes that depict fiery personal relationships between male family members and friends. We call the show Brothers, and each scene plumbs the depths of these fraternal relationships, aptly closing with Matthias and Derek in Godot. Derek makes it all too real when at the final performance, a dentist appointment delays his arrival. Our communal relief is palpable as he runs in at the last moment and steps into the scene just as it is about to start. Matthias said we should have called the scene Waiting for Derek. One piece causes a stir, the opening beat of Answers, a one-act play by Tom Topor, in which two detectives grill a suspect about an unspecified crime he may or may not have committed. The interrogation is intentionally over the top, designed to break down the suspect and compel him to confess to the crime regardless of his culpability. It mirrors events in the lives of many of these young men, intensified by racial profiling and abject bigotry. The real-life cast would most likely consist of a suspect who was a young person of color being interrogated by two older white police officers. I decide to turn it on its head and bring in an older European-American colleague to play the suspect, and cast two of my guys, both African-American, as the cops. When the lights fade up on a couple of young black cops grilling an old white guy, the audience is mesmerized before anyone says a word. It is quite a departure from the ubiquitous TV shows and movies, and it sets up a flashpoint of emotions from the start. The challenge is to keep my actors from imitating what they have seen and experienced firsthand, to bring their unique perspective to the scene rather than merely settling for artistic retribution. Although the play does demonstrate an unsympathetic demeanor on the part of the officers, I urge the men to dig deeper, that even if they were willing participants in the system, they can try and subtly buck that system to see what might happen. The result is fascinating. Instead of exacting revenge or stereotyping themselves, they sidestep cliches and transcend the expected. There is a certain ominous edge, but since they can identify with the position of the suspect more than the cops, there is also an underlying compassion that hums beneath the playwright's uncharitable stage directions. It is as if the audience were on the other side of the two-way glass and the men had agreed to show them the power they could wield without ever doing so. I have always been uncomfortable describing people by race and consider it one of the most divisive brandings in our society. But after decades of working with inner city youth in impoverished neighborhoods and now with the incarcerated, I am all too sadly aware that most of my students in these dire situations are people of color. Yet despite this seemingly impossible predicament, I have found that theater is a panacea, ameliorating the imbalance briefly and temporarily by providing opportunities for marginalized people to walk in someone else's shoes, assume other positions, and portray characters on stage that they are prevented from playing in real life. Inhabiting these roles and filling these spaces awakens something in the actor, in the person, an awareness that they are capable of more than is expected of them, that they do not have to surrender to the status quo, even if their current circumstances speak to the contrary. I tell my students all the time, acting is not about being someone else. It's about being you. And the beauty of it is that you can be anybody. I make one whopping mistake during the residency at Fortune that almost undermines everything we accomplished. A scene from Odette's Paradise Lost requires a gun. I buy a cheap water pistol, paint it black, and throw it into a bag with the rest of the props without running it by the administration. There's an age-old rule in theater forbidding actors to touch anyone else's props lest they are lost or misplaced when needed. My actors follow that rule diligently. However, it does not prevent Malik from taking his prop, a 99-cent water gun, from a distance indistinguishable from the real thing, and during a break in rehearsal, walking into his counselor's office and pointing it at her as a joke. I am called into the program's director's office and ripped a new one. She asks me what I was thinking, and before I can answer, tells me I was not thinking at all. I stand there like a penitent child. I have no defense. I broke one of my own directives, something I tell every actor before we start working together. Don't ever forget where you are and why you are there. In my zeal for authenticity, I forgot that guns had been the objects that almost destroyed the lives of many of these young men, and that weapons had no place in the work we do. I also forgot that the imagination of the actor and the audience is far more powerful than any hand prop called for in a play. I forgot my responsibility as their teacher and guide, and I completely ignored the tenet of one of my idols, Bertolt Brecht, who went out of his way to remind audiences that they were what they were watching was not real, only the message was. Now, when a weapon is required in a show, we use wooden blocks or sensory objects. We suggest rather than substantiate. We adjust the parameters of the scene so that threats may be posed without the actual agent of that threat. And with today's oversaturation of guns in the media, film, and everyday life, it is not only a revolutionary move, but a not so subtle reminder of the power of art and imagination over force and violence. At the brothers' cast party, David Rothenberg pulls me aside. Look, I follow his gaze, and we both watch the guys swiping slices of pizza, pouring each other's sodas, micro-hugging, backslapping, and laughing about the close calls and dropped lines, laughing about the mistakes they made, and unwittingly forgiving themselves and each other. David shakes his head in awe. A few months ago, they would not even make eye contact.
Oh,
That's
so
That's
beautiful.
amazing.
Oh my goodness.
Really,
So many sweet, sweet,
Oh.
and enriching details, and just the humanity in there, and beautiful.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you want me to read this other little thing, or do you
Yes,
want to
I
talk
do.
about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, please.
Okay. All right. I'm working on a new memoir that's coming out of nowhere. And and going somewhere. Anyway, this is just the prologue, and it's very, very short. This, by the way, the book is called You Don't Know Me. My first awareness of being me, of having my own thoughts and impulses, was in first grade. The school was collecting food for the poor in Africa, requesting cans as they kept longer and traveled farther. Africa, another continent. I could be a part of the world. I could help people thousands of miles away. I could do that. I descended the school stairs with a whole new attitude. No skipping down, making motor sounds, dragging my fingers along the diamond-shaped openings in the steel mesh that lined the staircase. Not today. I walked steadily and purposefully, my arms filled with cans of string beans and creamed corn and beets and Campbell's soup. I wasn't just walking down a flight of stairs. I was crossing an ocean, stopping every couple of steps to adjust the shifting load to keep it all from spilling out. I felt alive, grateful to have something to give, happy to be me. When I think of that moment, touch it, it resets things, rescues me from the uncertainty and inner criticism that often leads to doubting my worth. It reminds me that my first impulse was innately good, pure, loving. Later that year, I fell in love, twice. I went on stage and discovered another way to travel to the ends of the earth, stepping out from behind a curtain and into the light. I wore a bathrobe over my school uniform and a crown made in art class from strips of colored paper and glitter glued to a ring of cardboard. I carried a cigar box wrapped in tinfoil with all the regality and solemnity a first grader could muster. I don't remember if I was Balthazar, Caspar, or Melchior, or which of the Magi's gifts were in the shiny box, but I did know that the boy playing Joseph not only had the role I coveted, but he also captured my heart. Francis became my best friend, my first boyfriend, really, showing me with great confidence how to order my crayon box properly. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. Long before rainbow flags fluttered down Fifth Avenue, Francis had me put things in their proper place. My parents also separated that year, and my mother and sister and brother and I went to live at my grandmother's house. Since the school bus could only pick students up at an official address, and having no childcare or a second car with which to deliver me, my ever resourceful and blind trusting mother befriended a city bus driver who kept an eye out until I got off at Immaculate Conception School on the other side of town. It was a plan which today would be considered unthinkable, even child neglect. One snowy December day, I arrived to find the playground empty. Panicking, sure that they had canceled school because of the snow, I immediately turned around and stomped back to the bus stop. I made it home safely, with a driver no one knew, but not before numerous concerned calls from the school prompted hysteria from my mother and an irate blast from my father, who had to leave work to try to find me. That impulse to bolt when something is not right is still in place. I try to resist it and stay the course, but whenever I am thrown a curve or get smacked down by disappointment, my instinct is to run, get out, go back, start over. You'd think all those catechism classes would have taught me to trust that someone had my back. Not really. All they did was squeeze me even tighter with the crushing weight of a savior. When I decided to start writing this, the impulse to bolt was front and center. Everyone is writing memoirs these days, telling their stories, justifying their lives, making excuses, boasting, repenting, preparing time capsules. I suspect it is all in the hope that their story will be the one deserving of lights, cameras, and action. For millennia, spiritual teachers have been trying to hammer home the idea that it's being rather than becoming that brings peace of mind, not wanting, not even wanting to want. It's a tricky business. For when you do make an honest attempt to let it all go, the insidious thought creeps in that if you really do stop wanting, the universe will finally deliver what you've yearned for all along. And so it goes. This is the fourth book I have written, and if, like the others, it is never published or read, I will have at least delivered the goods on some cosmic level. You still won't know me.
Beautiful, Rich.
Whoa.
So great.
Gosh, Richard.
Oh, I didn't want you to
Oh
I didn't want
my
you to
God.
stop. So many
Oh my
beautiful
goodness.
things.